I knew something was wrong before I even opened the door. There was silence in the apartment. Not the kind of silence I was used to, cozy, filled with the noise of the TV or the clatter of her keyboard. No, this silence was different, dense, pressing. I closed the door behind me and froze. She was here. I could feel her presence. "You're late," came her voice. It was flat, but there was something prickly about it. I turned around slowly. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand. I glanced down at the bottle on the table, almost empty. "Delayed," I answered calmly. Her lips quivered. Her gaze was keen, wary. "Where have you been?" I grinned involuntarily. "Work. Where else?" She tilted her head slightly, as if analyzing my face. I knew that look. Looking for a lie. "Oh, really? Why do you ask as if you're sure you don't?" She set her glass down slowly, leaned forward, and clasped her fingers together in a lock. "Because you've changed." I remained silent. "You're cold," she continued. "You're always busy. You've stopped paying attention to me lately." I bowed my head, watching her. "You know why?" She narrowed her eyes. "No, I don't know." "Enlighten me." I inhaled deeply, holding back the irritation I felt. "Are you saying you really don't get it?" "No." Her voice hardened. "I mean, I'm sick of you acting like I'm your enemy." "And you're my friend?" She shuddered. "What do you mean?" I slowly lowered myself into the chair across from her and looked her straight in the eye. "Did you last even remember how we got here? How we got to this point?" Her fingers clenched. "You're starting this conversation?" "Am I starting?" I grinned. "You started him first." She frowned, as if she wanted to say something, but changed her mind. Then she stood up abruptly. "You know what? I'm sick of it." I watched her in silence. "You've changed, you know? You got stale. Cold. Suspicious. Why would I be any different?" She threw me a sharp look. "Is this about that situation?" I leaned forward a little. "You call that situation?" She pressed her lips together. "That was a long time ago. That was 6 months ago." I cut him off. "It's not a long time ago." She turned away, staring out the window. "You won't let me live." I inhaled slowly. "And you won't let me forget." She flinched, but quickly pulled herself together. "So you're just going to hold it over me forever? Huh?" I squinted. "What do you want? You want me to pretend it never happened?" She turned sharply toward me. "Did you?" "What?" "Made an appearance." I was silent, trying to comprehend what she had just said. "Are you saying—" "You're no angel either," she interrupted. I stared at her, feeling something dark slowly boiling inside. "What is this, an attempt to blame me?" She looked away. "It's just, sometimes I think that you're not infallible either." I clenched my fists. "Are you really comparing me to yourself right now?" She didn't answer. Silence filled the room again. I suddenly realized I was standing. I didn't even realize I was standing. My heart was beating steady, but inside it was clenching with rage. I couldn't take it anymore. "That's it," I said. She slowly raised her eyes to me. "What?" I looked at her, feeling the words freeze on my tongue. But I said them. "That's it. I won't take it anymore." She blinked. "What are you talking about?" "About enough." My voice sounded oddly flat. "You think you can do anything to me? That you can turn things in your favor?" She straightened up, gripping the edge of the table. "Are you threatening me?" I grinned. "I'm warning you." She clenched her teeth. "You don't realize who you're messing with." The next morning, I was awakened by a persistent ringing of the phone that didn't stop for a second, as if the caller was ready to torment me indefinitely. I reluctantly reached for the phone, glanced at the screen, and saw my mother's name, which in itself was a red flag. She rarely called this early, especially on a weekday, so I knew it was something important. "Hello." My voice sounded hoarse, as if I'd been up all night, when in fact I had. "Son, what's going on with you and Lisa?" The mother's voice sounded concerned, but there was a hint of accusation in it. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to collect my thoughts, because inwardly I was already prepared for such a development. "What exactly did she say to you?" I asked calmly, though irritation was starting to rise inside. "She called me late at night and cried into the phone, saying that you'd changed, that you'd become cold and indifferent, that you didn't love her anymore. My mother's voice was condemning, as if she'd already drawn her conclusions without even hearing my version of events. I straightened up in bed and ran my hand over my face, trying to keep from the harsh answer that was the first thing that came to mind. Mom, have you ever wondered why I've changed? My voice remained steady, but my insides were seething with resentment. She said you're blaming her for something that didn't happen, that you're estranged, and now you're looking for reasons to make her guilty. My mother's voice was getting harsher and harsher, and I realized she was already on her side. I took a deep breath before continuing the conversation, realizing that right now every word I said could either turn the situation in my favor or turn it even more against me. You've known me since I was born, Mom. You know how I've always been, how I've become. Do you really think I've suddenly turned into a heartless man who tortures his wife for no reason? There was a short silence on the other end of the line, and I realized that my words had made her think after all. Then tell me the truth. Her voice was softer now, but still wary. I ran my hand over my face again, weighing how far I was willing to take this conversation. Lisa cheated on me, Mom, I said in a steady but firm voice, deciding there was no point in hiding it anymore. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a silence that lasted a few seconds but seemed like an eternity to me. It's not true, my mother's voice trailed off, and I realized she was trying to find some explanation for what she'd heard. I'm not going to convince you of anything. I got up from the bed, heading to the window and opening it, letting in the fresh air that seemed vital to me at the moment. Just know that I'm not going to stay silent, tolerate her manipulations, and pretend everything's okay anymore. But why did she say it was a lie? Why was she so scared? The mother's voice was not one of disbelief, but rather of confusion. I grinned, looking at the gray sky outside the window, where the clouds were slowly thickening, as if reflecting my condition. Because she started her game, Mom. She wants to portray herself as the victim, to make everyone believe her version of events and turn their backs on me. Oh my God, my mother sighed heavily, and I heard her cover the phone with her hand, probably trying to cope with her emotions. I'm sorry you got caught up in this, but I'm not going to let her ruin my life by passing off lies as truth, I added. I need to think about it, her mother said at last, and she hung up the phone to say goodbye. Lisa wasn't going to stop. She had already started her version of events, and now I had to face the consequences of her game. It had only been 2 days since our conversation, but I was already beginning to feel the effects of her game, which had spread faster than I could have anticipated. My father wouldn't return my calls, though he had never ignored me before, especially when I called several times in a row. Friends started acting wary, as if they knew something, but preferred to keep it to themselves so as not to get involved in other people's squabbles. Even co-workers at work, who usually weren't interested in my personal life, looked at me as if they'd already heard something about me that changed their minds. I knew Lisa wouldn't stop, but I didn't expect her to decide to strike in this particular way, making me a monster in the eyes of others. The third morning after our conversation, I woke up to the phone ringing again, but this time it wasn't someone from the family calling, but my boss, who never bothered me after hours. We need to talk. His voice was dry, unemotional, but I sensed this wasn't just a normal work conversation. Did something happen? I asked, even though I knew inside that the conversation would be about Lisa. I'd rather meet in person. He didn't give me time to think, just named the place and time, and then hung up without even waiting for my answer. I sensed something was wrong, but decided that the only way to find out the truth was to go to the meeting to see what level Lisa was able to get to in her lies. When I entered the small cafe indicated by the boss, I immediately saw him sitting at a far table where no one could overhear us. He looked tense, and his gaze was as if he was about to say something extremely unpleasant to me, but couldn't find the right words. "Sit down," he said briefly, nodding to the chair opposite. I sat down, crossing my arms over my chest to show that I was calm, though inside I was already starting to boil with a premonition of trouble. "I got a call from Human Resources today," he began, averting his gaze as if he didn't want to meet my eyes. "They've received a complaint about you, and now the matter needs to be discussed." I exhaled slowly, gathering all my stamina so I wouldn't give in to my first emotions. "I can guess who that complaint is from," I said, looking directly at him to see his reaction. He looked up but didn't say anything, just watched me, obviously waiting for my reaction to the news. "The document states that you allegedly threatened your wife," he finally said, and I felt my insides clench with rage, though I kept my face still. "What's more, she claims that you were aggressive and psychologically pressured, causing her to have a nervous breakdown." I leaned forward slowly, placing my palms on the table to keep control of my voice. "Do you believe it yourself?" I asked, watching his expression carefully. He hesitated a moment to answer, but then straightened up, folding his arms in front of him. "I've known you for a long time, and it's hard for me to see you in that light," he admitted. But then his voice became sterner. "You realize, however, that such accusations cannot be ignored." I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to swear out loud, but instead I just looked him straight in the eye. "You know she's lying," I said without raising my voice, but every word I said was imbued with cold certainty. He was silent for a few seconds, then sighed heavily, running his hand through his hair as if trying to find a solution to this situation. "I don't know what to believe," he finally admitted, clearly conflicted between what he knew about me and what he was now hearing. "But the company can't risk its reputation, so this is a matter for the board to consider." I felt something in my chest tighten, because I realized that this was what Lisa was trying to do, make me an outcast, ruin my life so badly that I had no chance of recovery. "I haven't been given an official order yet, but it's likely you'll be suspended until the circumstances are clarified," he added, clearly expecting me to explode. But I didn't give him that pleasure. I just nodded, then slowly stood up, feeling an icy rage building up inside that crowded out all other emotions. "Thanks for your honesty," I said briefly, then turned around and walked out without even saying goodbye. Once I was outside, it took me a few seconds to even out my breathing, because at that moment I wanted to snap the hell out of it and just let the rage that was boiling up inside come out. But I realized that emotions were my weak spot right now, and if I wanted to beat Lisa, I would have to play cold-bloodedly, just like she was playing. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and found a number I never would have thought to use before. It was time to go on the offensive. I knew I had to act fast, because Lisa had already set her plan in motion, and by the minute her lies were penetrating deeper into the minds of those around her. I needed an ally, someone who knew her well enough to realize she wasn't who she said she was. I thought about different candidates, but no one seemed suitable until my phone vibrated in my pocket and a name I'd never expected to see popped up on the screen. The caller was my Uncle Mark, a man who always stayed out of family conflicts, but who had the insight to see right through people. He never blindly trusted anyone's word, preferring to deal with situations himself rather than listen to someone else's complaints and accusations. If he was calling now, it meant that he had either heard about the situation from a relative or felt that something was wrong. "Hi," I replied, trying to speak calmly, even though I felt inside that the conversation wasn't going to be easy. "I need to see you." His voice was firm, but not accusatory, which gave me hope. "It's about Lisa and what she's telling everyone around her." I closed my eyes for a moment because I already knew what he was going to say, but I still wanted to hear the details. "When and where?" I asked without further questions, because I realized that he had something important to say. "In an hour at a bar on Baker Street," he answered, and then just hung up, not giving me time to ask further. I knew Mark never acted without a reason, and if he decided to talk in person, it meant he either doubted Lisa's words or already knew something I didn't understand yet. When I entered the bar, Mark was already sitting at the far table, clutching a glass of whiskey, but his face showed no signs of relaxation, only tension and concentration. I walked over to him, sat down across from him, and immediately sensed that the conversation would be important because he was looking at me as if he were trying to look into my soul. "Do you know what Lisa says about you?" He didn't waste time with unnecessary questions, getting straight to the point, which was his style. "I know she's making herself look like a victim," I replied calmly, though inside I was starting to feel angry that her lies had spread so quickly. Mark pressed his lips together, then set the glass on the table and leaned a little closer, lowering his voice. She'd gone beyond just complaining to her relatives. His gaze was hard, as if he were testing my reaction to every word. She'd already gone to a lawyer, and she'd started spreading rumors that you'd not only threatened her, but that you might have laid a hand on her. I felt everything inside clench because I realized she was going down the dirtiest path possible, hoping to destroy my reputation completely. And who believed it? I asked, even though I knew some of the relatives had already taken her side. Quite a few people. Mark sighed heavily, looking away, as if trying to find the right words. But I'm not one of them. I looked up at him, because those words meant more to me than he could have imagined. Why? I asked, even though I'd known for a long time that Mark wasn't the type to trust words without checking the facts. He grinned, but it was the grin of a man who had already seen too many lies in his life and had learned to recognize them. Because I know what a real victim looks like, his voice was firm, and there was something in his eyes that told me he'd been in this kind of situation before. And Lisa doesn't act like a frightened woman, but like someone who's confident in her victory. I nodded because I knew what he was talking about, because I'd noticed that confidence in her eyes when we talked that night too. So you're on my side? I asked, even though I already felt he was the only one who hadn't yet accepted her lies as truth. I'm not on anyone's side, he said calmly, sipping his whiskey, but then he looked me straight in the eye. I just want to get to the bottom of this, because I hate being led around. I knew that was the best answer I could get from him because Mark didn't take anyone's word for it. But if he decided to look into the situation, then he really doubted Lisa's word. Do you have a plan? I asked, because I realized he was already thinking about how he could expose her lies. Mark grinned, then pulled out his phone and unlocked the screen, then showed me some pictures that showed Lisa, but not alone, but in the company of some man she was clearly acting a little too close to. This was taken a week ago, he said calmly, watching my reaction. I wasn't looking for anything on purpose. I just happened to be in the same place they were sitting and decided to take a couple of pictures when I heard what they were talking about. What were they talking about? I asked, even though I already knew it was nothing good. Mark looked at me carefully, then leaned closer and lowered his voice to a low pitch. About how to get rid of you as quickly as possible. His voice was almost a whisper. About which divorce options would give her the most benefit, and how to make everyone around her believe you were a real tyrant. I now knew for sure that Lisa didn't just want to ruin my relationship with my family. She planned to ruin my entire life. So she's been preparing for this for a long time, I said calmly. Mark nodded, then put the phone away and looked at me with a serious look. The question is, what are you going to do now? He said, waiting for my answer. I knew that if I went straight ahead and presented Lisa with proof of her lies, she would instantly get on the defensive and come up with a new, even more elaborate version of events. Her talent for manipulation was too strong to simply break down when presented with photos or recorded conversations. If I wanted to not just put her in her place, but to destroy her entire game, I had to make her wrong, force her to show her true nature in front of those who still believed in her act. Are you going to use those pictures against her right away? Mark asked, watching my reaction carefully. I shook my head slightly, then slowly leaned back in my chair, contemplating the next step that was going to be the key to this game. No, I said after a short pause to make my words more meaningful. If I just showed them to my family or friends, she'd find a way to turn it around and make me look like a stalker or paranoid, following her around and looking for evidence against her. Mark tilted his head to the side with interest, clearly assessing my thinking, and then grinned slightly, apparently pleased that I wasn't going to take the easy way out. Then what are you up to? He asked, squinting his eyes, as if studying my resolve. I glanced at him, then slowly leaned forward and folded my hands on the table, as if I were about to reveal to him a complex strategy that would require precise execution. I need her to show her true colors. My voice was steady, but inside I could feel the icy resolve burning inside me. I need to push her to make a mistake, to make her prove herself to those she's trying to convince of her innocence. Mark nodded, clearly agreeing that this was the most effective method. But there was a question in his gaze that he wanted a clear answer to. How are you going to do it? There was no skepticism in his voice, but rather curiosity, because he knew that I was already mentally constructing a plan. I'll make her feel threatened, I said, keeping my eyes on Mark. I'll start acting like I already know the truth, but I'll keep the details to myself, making her question how far I've gotten in my investigation. Mark listened intently, obviously working through the possible consequences of this approach, and then leaned forward slightly, as if he wanted to make sure I was fully aware of what I was doing. "You want to put her in a situation where she'll give herself away?" he said, scrutinizing my expression. I nodded slowly, because that was exactly what my main goal was. "If she senses that her lies are about to fall apart, she'll start making mistakes," I continued, explaining my logic. "She'll get nervous, start making mistakes in her stories, and most importantly, she'll try to make another move that I can intercept and use against her." Mark looked at me thoughtfully, then grinned slightly, shaking his head as if admiring my melodiousness. "Cold-blooded but effective," he said, then finished the rest of his whiskey and set the glass on the table with a light clink. "If you really go through with this plan, she'll fall into her own trap." I knew Mark was right, but I also realized that this game would require the utmost self-control on my part because Lisa would cling to every opportunity to outplay me. "The important thing is not to let her realize how close I'm getting to the truth," I added, getting up from the table and throwing the money for our order on the counter. "I need her to create a situation where I have irrefutable proof that she's lying." Mark nodded, then stood up and looked at me with a slight smile of approval. "Then you should be especially careful." His voice sounded calm, but there was a warning in it. "If she realizes you're playing your game, she might do something unexpected to take the initiative." I met his gaze and nodded, because I knew there was always a risk, but I was ready to see this plan through, no matter what it cost me. I knew that if I wanted to get my way, I needed to create a situation where Lisa would lose control of her emotions to those she was trying to deceive. She was good at manipulation, but even the most skillful liars make mistakes sooner or later, especially when they believe they are in control. The only thing left for me to do was to force her to reveal her true nature in front of witnesses who had previously believed her words without reservation. I thought for a long time about what would be the most appropriate time to do this, but the decision came on its own when my mother invited me to a family dinner to be held at my parents' house. "Lisa will be there too," she said on the phone, her tone as if she expected me to say no, knowing how strained our relationship was. I was silent for a second, weighing all the risks. Then I took a deep breath and made a decision that could change everything. "Of course I'll be there," I replied in a calm voice, though inside I was beginning to calculate exactly how I could use this evening to put Lisa at a disadvantage. When I entered my parents' house, I immediately sensed the tension that hung in the air like a taut string. My mother walked around the kitchen with the look of someone who is trying to avoid conflict, but doesn't know how to keep everyone within the bounds of propriety. My father sat at the table, tensely studying the screen of his phone, pretending not to notice my appearance. Lisa was already here, sitting on the couch with the look of an aggrieved victim who had to endure the company of the man who had supposedly caused her so much pain. I met her gaze, then smiled slowly, like I didn't care that she was here or what rumors she'd managed to spread these days. "It's good to see you," I said in a tone as if I really had only warm feelings for her, even though I could feel the cold lump of anticipation clenching inside. She raised her eyebrows slightly, clearly not expecting such behavior on my part, but quickly pulled herself together, making a mournful expression. "I wish I could say the same," she replied with feigned bitterness, trying to look as believable as possible in front of her parents. I didn't give in to her provocation, instead just sat down at the table and picked up a glass of water, taking a sip slowly to gain a few seconds before my next move. "How have your last few days been?" I asked, deliberately giving my voice a friendly tone to make her relax and feel safe. She squinted slightly, as if trying to figure out what was behind my behavior, but then shrugged and pretended she wasn't interested in talking to me. "Better than in your presence," she threw coldly, clearly trying to maintain the victim image she was so diligently constructing. I smiled, then pretended to think for a second, then said in an even, almost lazy tone, "I wonder if your new friend feels the same way." Complete silence hung in the room, and I immediately noticed Lisa's fingers tense, clenching into a fist before she could pull herself together. "What are you talking about?" Her voice remained calm, but a shadow of anxiety flickered in her eyes that she didn't have time to hide. I slowly set the glass on the table, then looked at her with a slight chuckle, as if it was just an innocent question that had accidentally rolled off my tongue. "I just thought," I continued, pretending not to notice that she was getting nervous. "You've been spending a lot of time in the company of someone lately. What's his name?" She tensed, but quickly put on a fake smile, clearly trying to remain calm in front of my parents, who were now watching the conversation closely. "If you mean one of my friends, I don't see why you should care," she said, but her voice trembled slightly, betraying an underlying concern. I nodded as if agreeing with what she said, then leaned forward slightly to let her feel that this conversation was for a reason. Of course, I said, then paused, deliberately dragging out the moment, before adding the last word that was going to break her composure. "Daniel." Lisa froze abruptly, as if she'd lost the ability to move for a second, and then her eyes widened, as if she'd heard something she hadn't expected. "Who is it?" my mother suddenly asked, shifting her gaze from her to me, clearly sensing that the conversation was going beyond the usual exchange of barbs. I didn't take my eyes off Lisa, because I knew that if I saw fear in her eyes now, it meant she'd taken the bait and was no longer in control. She exhaled convulsively, then rose abruptly from her seat, giving me a searing look that was a mixture of anger, fear, and the realization that I knew too much. "You've been following me?" Her voice shook with rage, and it was the first time she couldn't keep her mask on in front of her parents. I shook my head slowly, then picked up my phone, unlocked the screen, and just turned it towards her, showing her the pictures Mark had taken. "No," I said, watching the panicked horror in her eyes. "I just came across a couple of interesting pictures that say more than what you're saying." She jumped up from her seat, grabbed her bag, and without a word, headed for the exit, slamming the door loudly, leaving only the shocked silence of her parents behind her. I slowly shifted my gaze to my mother, who looked like she had just realized that all of Lisa's words about her suffering might have been a lie. "I think we have something to talk about now," I said, folding my arms across my chest calmly, knowing that Lisa had just made her biggest mistake yet. I stared at the door, which was still shaking slightly after Lisa had slammed it forcefully, leaving behind a tense silence, soaked with shock and realization. The room felt like something fragile had just cracked, but it hadn't broken completely, leaving behind a shaky sense of uncertainty. I shifted my gaze to my mother, who sat with her lips pressed tightly together, clearly trying to make sense of the fact that her view of the situation had changed dramatically in just a few seconds. My father was silent, but I noticed the way he exhaled slowly, then ran his hand over his face, as if he was only now realizing how badly he'd been led around. Unlike my mother, he'd never fully trusted Lisa, but until the last moment he tried to stay out of our disagreements, believing it was none of his business to deal with family conflicts. "I think you've had a chance to think about who the victim in this story really was," I said in a flat voice, watching my parents' reactions to see how much my punch changed their minds. My mother shook her head, then slowly raised her gaze and looked directly at me, her eyes glistening, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of frustration or anger. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Her voice sounded muffled, as if she still hadn't fully realized that everything she believed in had turned out to be a lie. I slowly slid my hand across the table, then folded my fingers in a lock and looked at her with cold certainty. "Because I needed you to see for yourself," I said calmly, not averting my gaze. "If I'd just come in and started proving that she was lying, you'd think I was just trying to smear her to justify my behavior." My mother lowered her eyes, then sighed heavily, and I realized that her beliefs were beginning to crumble, though she was trying to hold on to the version of events that Lisa had so diligently imposed on her. "I always felt she was insincere," my father said suddenly, his voice low but firm, as if he'd known for a long time that this moment would come. "But I didn't want to interfere, because I thought it was a private matter." I grinned, then turned my gaze to the window, where Lisa's silhouette flickered in the light of the street lamps, and now she was standing by her car, frantically rummaging through her bag, perhaps try to text someone or just catch her breath. "She's not going to give up that easily," I said, more to myself than to my parents, but my father caught my words and nodded, clearly sharing my confidence. Her mother looked up again, then ran her hand across the table as if trying to gather the thoughts that were chaotically flitting around in her head. "What are you going to do next?" she asked, but her voice no longer had the same confidence in Lisa, only a doubt that was gradually eroding her previous opinion. I thought for just a second, then slowly exhaled and said the words that were going to be the final chord in this whole story. "I'm going to destroy her lies for good." My voice was calm, but there was an unshakable confidence in it. "I'm going to show everyone what really happened, and I'm not going to let her control the story anymore." Father nodded silently, then reached for a glass of water and took a few sips, as if trying to wash away the bad taste of the realization that he'd turned a blind eye to what was happening in front of his nose for too long. Mother didn't say anything, just looked away, but I could see that there was a struggle going on inside her between her affection for Lisa and what she'd just seen. "You know she won't stop," she finally said, but her voice was weak, like she already realized she couldn't change what was happening. I grinned, then looked out the window again, where Lisa was now sitting in the car with her forehead resting against the steering wheel, clearly contemplating how she was going to get out of this situation. "Let her try," I said, then slowly rose from the table and headed for the exit, knowing that this battle wasn't over. But now I had all the cards in my hand. I knew that Lisa wouldn't give up without a fight, but I also realized that I now had everything I needed to deliver the final blow. She'd spent months building up an image of a hapless victim I'd supposedly oppressed and made suffer, but now her carefully constructed facade was cracking right in front of those she was trying to convince of her innocence. There was only one thing left for me to do, and that was to bring the game to an end by bringing the truth down on her in such a way that she would never be able to justify herself again. I waited for the right moment, because I knew that if I attacked right away, she would flounder and come up with a new version of events. But if I gave her time to feel safe, if I let her think she could still take the initiative, then she'd create a situation where I could make the final blow. And that moment came sooner than I expected. 2 days after that family dinner, Lisa organized a meeting with her friends, including people who were not yet fully convinced of her story, but who were still leaning toward her side. She clearly wanted to regain control of the situation, so she decided to play the victim once again, surrounding herself with people who supported her, but didn't know the truth yet. I learned of this meeting from Mark, who had been following her manipulations for a long time, and was now not just an observer, but an active ally in this game. "They're meeting at a restaurant on River Street," he told me over the phone, his voice flat but with a note of anticipation. "I think you have a chance to end this story nicely." I grinned, then looked at my phone screen, where the message from Lisa that she had sent me hours ago was still hanging. "You may think you've won, but I'm still here. You won't destroy what I built." I hadn't answered her then, but now I knew exactly what I had to do. "Thanks for the information," I said to Mark, then ended the call and picked up the phone to prepare what was going to be the final nail in the lid of her lies. When I entered the restaurant, I immediately noticed Lisa sitting at a far table, surrounded by people who were nodding, listening intently to her pitiful voice. She was already starting her act, and her voice sounded steady, but there was a fake pain in it that I could easily make out now. "He's unbearable," she said, leaning in gracefully to make the scene more intimate. "He wants to destroy me because he can't bear the fact that I don't love him anymore." I walked silently over to their table, then slowly lowered myself into a vacant chair before anyone could react to my appearance. Lisa froze, her fingers tensing, but she quickly pulled herself together and pulled on her usual mask of indifference, though I saw her eyes widen slightly. "You're not here by invitation," she said coldly, clearly hoping I would just leave if she was confident enough in her words. I grinned, then put my phone down on the table, slowly unlocking the screen and opening the gallery where all the photos Mark had taken were saved. "I'm here to finish your game," I said in a flat voice, then turned the screen so that everyone at the table could see the pictures of Lisa sitting in the restaurant with the very man she'd been making plans with to get rid of me. One of Lisa's friends, a young guy with a tenacious gaze, leaned closer, then squinted, studying the photos. "It's Daniel," he said, then looked up at Lisa, doubt already in his voice. "You said he was just a co-worker, and now—" Lisa quickly snatched the phone out of my hands, then hit the lock button and forcefully placed it on the table, trying to maintain control of the situation. "It's just pictures," she said, but her voice trembled, and everyone in the room noticed it at once. "He's stalking me. He's following me to make me look bad in your eyes." I leaned forward, then pulled a second device out of my pocket, a voice recorder I had brought specifically for this moment. "Am I really stalking you?" I asked, then pressed the play button, and Lisa's muffled voice echoed through the restaurant, recorded that day as she discussed with her coworker how to make me look like a monster. She turned pale, then stood up abruptly. But it was too late, because now her friends heard every word in which she called me a fool who was too slow to realize what was going on, and discussed how I could be made to lose my job, my family, and my friends. The shocked faces of the people at the table were the best confirmation that her lies had crumbled right before their eyes. I think now everyone understands who is the victim and who is the manipulator, I said calmly, then stood up, taking my phone and recorder, and headed for the exit, leaving Lisa standing in the middle of the ruined world she had created. As I was walking outside, I heard one of her friends stand up abruptly. Then a voice boomed out. "You used us? Was it all a lie?" Lisa mumbled something in response, but her voice was already trembling, because she realized that now no one would believe her words. I stepped out into the cool evening air, then inhaled deeply, feeling the heaviness that had been weighing on me for the past few months finally disappear. Now this game was definitively over. Lisa tried to salvage the situation, but after the exposure, her story fell apart and her friends turned on her, realizing that she had used their trust for her own ends. She tried to accuse me of surveillance, but the evidence spoke for itself. 2 weeks later, she filed for divorce herself, but this time she couldn't make herself look like a victim. I left without regrets, because there was no point in looking back. I knew now that I'd dealt with it to the end, leaving her no chance to turn the situation in my favor again. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you like the story, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm show my content more often. If you are new to the channel, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep making more stories for you.